Everald is one of Australia's foremost fundraising experts. What he doesn't know about fundraising between he and Daniel McDermott is probably not worth knowing. Everald can maybe tell you a little bit more, but he was very heavily involved in the fundraising venture for St John's Cathedral and the completion of that. So give a very warm Anglican welcome to Everald Compton, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, now, I don't make speeches. I chat to people. I'm an old man. I turn 88 next week, and so I've, you know, you've got to sit me down every 10 minutes, you know, otherwise I cave in. But my background is just by way of background, no skiting about this. I was a fundraising consultant on the international scene for 42 years. I started fundraising when I was 24 years of age. My first assignment was to raise the money to build St Andrew's War Memorial Hospital on Wickham Terrace. There was only the old Emmanuel College there at the time and nothing there, and that was my first job. And then I set up as a fundraising consultant and eventually had offices in Brisbane and in Wellington, New Zealand, Vancouver, Canada, London, and then Johannesburg, South Africa. And in the course of 42 years as a fundraising consultant, I worked on campaigns in 26 different nations. Now, I want to make it clear that I've been retired as a fundraising consultant for 15 years. The world has changed a lot since that time, and so I can't claim that I'm a modern fundraising consultant, but my mate Daniel McDermott, wherever he's hiding, Daniel is currently in the business, and in my view, the best currently practicing fundraising consultant you can find. So if you want a fundraiser to come and help you in the parish, it's Daniel, not me. I turn up at occasional meetings for churches that want me to chat about fundraising. My fees are a bottle of whiskey at the start and another bottle of whiskey at the end, and then I leave. Now, I just want to talk to you about a few principles. Daniel can get you down to the modern techniques, but things I learned over those years, and I'll stop in plenty of time for you to ask me questions about issues you face in your own church, and I'll see if I can relate that to something that happened in my 42 years out there in the trade. But with churches, there are two different, quite clearly different sorts of fundraising you do. One is what in Christian terms we call stewardship, the money we put in the plate Sunday by Sunday to keep the mission of the church going. And the principles you use in generating stewardship in the parish are different to the ones you use when you're out selling a social project or a school or something you know, like that. When you're dealing with the money that people give Sunday by Sunday, you're dealing with their spiritual life, their faith, their theology, their commitment to their church. And so you base the whole challenge of that around their faith. And yet they're not motivated by the church budget or how nice the church looks or whatever. They're motivated by what brings them to church every Sunday and what makes them Christians you know, during the week. And so when you're dealing with stewardship, don't run it like a normal fundraising program. You run it as a very deep and profound Christian experience for them and a Christian challenge for them, and you base it around their spirituality, not a project of any sort. But then if you decide you're going to run or establish something in your parish that's for social use, whether it's a childcare centre or a school or a hospice for old people or whatever it is, you then base it around that project and what it's going to do. And before you can start fundraising, you must do an enormous amount of homework. You must establish that there's a need for the institution. You must ascertain from the local authorities that they'll allow you to build it in the first place, because I've seen people rush off and start fundraising to start a school, and then they find out after they've raised some money that nobody's going to let them build it, and you've got an enormous problem. You've in fact deceived people, about that. You've got to get your costings right, and not just the capital cost, but the running costs. Is this thing going to lose the church a lot of money by starting it? And you must not start it because it'll generate profits for the church. I was invited by a church that I'll leave nameless the other day to come out. They're going broke. Their congregation's older than me. They're going broke, and they want to start a childcare centre because they reckon it'll get $50,000 a year profit, and that'll keep the church going when they can't put enough in the plate to do it. And I said, I can't think of a more dishonest reason to start a childcare centre than that you want the profit out of it to prop up this church. And I refused to go to the meeting because I reckon that was pure corruption. If there was a childcare centre needed, it was because you were going to run a Christian ministry in that thing, not because you wanted to prop up a dying church. And so I think the key thing I want to say to you as a preliminary is do your homework carefully before you start, and make sure you're doing something that's viable, and above all, something that's needed. Now let me talk about a few principles of fundraising that it might be helpful to you. First of all, people give to people. They don't usually give to the cause. Now, the cause has got to be the right one. The cause has got to be a good one. But people give to people. In other words, they give to the person who asks them because they respect the integrity of the person who asks them for money, and they know that you're not a person who's going to swindle their money or lead them down the garden path. They give because they respect you in what you do, and for that reason, fundraising has got to be based around a team of people going out to ask. Somebody said to me when they put on a farewell dinner for me when I've retired after 42 years, and somebody in the crowd got up and said, "Everald, tell us what is the magic way you raised all those millions of dollars?" And I said, there's no magic way. Somebody has got to ask somebody for some money, full stop. There is no magic way in which you're going to do it. And so people will give according to who's in the team and what their integrity is. Now, usually, and there's always exceptions to every rule, if you go out asking for money, you won't get any more money than you've actually put in yourself. In other words, before you can go out, you've got to become a donor. And don't tell me, look, I'm too poor to be a donor. To be a donor, you've only got to put in one silver coin and you're a donor. So there's no such thing as you can't be a donor. But by and large, if you're going to see people who are your friends, people you know, they will put in the same amount of money as you put in. They'll sense, in many cases, they'll ask you, well, what do you expect? You know, I've gone out fundraising my church and people have said to me, well, Everald, we'll need a bit of a guide. What are you putting in? You can't say I'm too poor, but I'm hoping you'll put some money in. I mean, you've got to be, you know, a donor yourself in that regard. So fundraising depends on how many committed people you've got in the church and where they're going to put in money. Now, on occasions, you can get more money than you put in yourself. I wouldn't rely on it. I mean, I ran a campaign in the church once and we were looking for a major donor and nobody could think, and we wanted somebody, there were major donors around, but who knew them well enough, you know, to go and whatever. There's one little old lady sitting over in the corner. She looked like she didn't have tuppence to bless herself. And she put her hand up and said, I can get you some money. And I said, well, that's great. I thought she was going to get me a fiver from one of her mates. And she said, my son is the chairman and chief shareholder of a major public company. And she said, I'm seeing him next Sunday night and he won't get any dinner until he gives me some money, you know. And so, you know, she obviously had that sort of influence. But you've also, you know, got to study who you've got in your church and who you have influence with. Now, sadly, in my lifetime, the economic power of people coming to church has declined. When I was growing up in St Stephen's Church in Toowoomba, there's somebody from Toowoomba here, isn't there? Somebody from Toowoomba here. Well, I went to St Stephen's in Neil Street in the Sunday school there. And the top 10 elders in the church, the 10 senior elders, this is back in 1940, the 10 senior elders in the church all owned a major business in Toowoomba, the whole 10 elders. One owned the radio station, one owned the newspaper, one owned the biggest department store, one owned the biggest car. They're all elders in the church. Well, I went back to St Stephen's the other day for they welcomed me back to a luncheon, and I find that every one of the elders is either a pensioner or a self-funded retiree without much money. Fine people, but they don't have the clout that those guys had 60 years back in 1940. For some reason, the guys with economic clout aren't coming to the mainline churches anymore, at least. And so that curtails our fundraising, capacity, to do things. And I had a funny instance, one where I was raising money for an old people's home at Ingham in North Queensland a long time ago, and I found that the chairman they'd appointed, that the local Catholic church had appointed to run this, was in fact the local mafia guy. Now, he was a peaceful mafia, they told me. Anyway, he and I got on well together. His name was Bruno. And he said, "How much you want?" And I told him, "We need 100,000 to kick this off." And he called them all into the room. And he'd say, "Luigi, 10,000 from you." And Luigi said, "Oh, no, Luigi, are you questioning me?" No. Went round the room, we got the whole 100,000 around the room, and I went home in the whole, the whole situation. Now, so I want to recommend to you, if you want to raise some money in your parish, can you get a mafia guy in your parish? It does, it does a hell of a lot of good for the, for the system. But you need to do your homework, in fact, as to who's got money. Now, we do, down the years, I've run into people who've said to me, "Look, you can't talk about money. It's not Christian to talk about money. You've got to talk about spiritual life." Well, I'd agree with that. When you read the scriptures, you find that of all the things that Jesus said in his ministry, according to the Bible, the most favourite topic he spoke about was people's money. And when we speak to people about their money, we've got their undivided attention, I can assure you, because they're going to lose some of it. And so it's a spiritual weapon, that we have. And so you've got to sit down and be coldly critical and say, who in our parish has got a bit of money? So we can start this off, and without being guilty, you've got to work out how you can get there. And sometimes you never know who's got, like that little lady you told you about who had a son. I raised money way back for Oriel College at Oxford, the old college which had been there for 1,000 years, is in disrepair. And Zelman Cowan, who was the Vice Chancellor of Queensland University, then the Governor-General, his last appointment in life was his Provost of Oriel College at Oxford, and he invited me to come and help him repair the old college, which was falling down after 1,000 years. And there was a volunteer that used to come into the office to help me track down all the old boys who had this terrible name of Oriolenses, they called them, terrible. Anyway, and he was helping me track down all these guys and what they did, and and who did well. And he used to come in a decrepit old car, and he looked so poor that I used to take him out and buy him his lunch. And I found, and he told me while I was there, he's going to leave all his estate to the college. And I helped him fill out the form, and he wrote out his form, and I thought that college was going to get a little old house, which he did live in this car. I thought, well, anyway, here we go. When he died, Zelman Cowan, who'd left by then, but he got the news, phoned me and said that the guy had left £9 million in his will. He had inherited it from relatives way back, and he hadn't spent a penny of it. And he died and left it all to Oriel College. So when you've got anybody in your church who just sits there and does some voluntary work, do a bit of research to find out if they had any rich relatives anywhere that that left them any money. Now, a couple of other things I want to say, and one is that publicity does not raise you money. You feel as if you get in the Courier Mail, you get on the news, it's going to raise you. Publicity does not raise you a cent. What publicity does is soften the ground for you to go out. It means that people know what you're talking about, but people don't send you in droves of money because they get publicity. And so it's important that you sit down, and if you want to raise $1 million for some project you've got, usually you won't get $1 million unless you get a top donor who gives you 10% of that. I mean, these things vary. But you're not going to get $1 million unless you can find somebody who'll kick in 100,000. And you'll find in the end that 80% of the money comes from 20% of the people. Am I still right, Daniel? And so you've got to sit down and work out, okay, we need one at 100,000, three at 50,000, so on down, we need so many at $100 down the bottom. You've got to sit down and work out how can you get $1 million. Is it going to be 100 people you've got to approach, or 200 people you've got to approach? Then you've got to say, well, where are, that's the task, and where are they? How do we find people in all of those categories? And you need to find workers and volunteers in all of those categories to ask, and then people who you identify. So you can spend a long, long time identifying your market. And it doesn't matter how difficult a thing is, as long as you can find people who you think have got a reason to give to it. And in your case, hopefully, they want your church to have a ministry. But one of the most difficult campaigns I ever ran in my life was again in England, where the Institute of Dermatology asked me to raise some money for them for research. And I thought, well, what a miserable course. How the hell do you raise money for dermatology, you know? And I said to the professor, look, there must be a market out there, but it will only be the people who they scratch themselves all day. That'll be the market, and people aren't going to be too sympathetic otherwise. And I said, look, I know this breaks convention, but you tell me 10 wealthy guys that you've got on your books who scratch themselves all day long. Now, I'll go out and interview them. I won't let on that I know anything about them. I'll just say, look, I'm looking at the feasibility of raising money for the Institute of Dermatology. The fellas in their office would undo their sleeve and say, look at that, mate, I got it, you know. And we raise the money from people who are scratching themselves all day. You've got to isolate the market, you know, and work out where it is. And so if you've got a social service project, you've got to say to yourself, who is going to benefit from this project? Let's see if they can help in any way. I raised money for a domestic violence home in Ballarat years ago. Domestic violence has been going on a long time, not getting a lot of publicity now. And I formed a committee of men whose daughters had been violated. They turned up and said, this must not happen again. So you've got to isolate the market. And so let me stop, and you can ask me a few questions before Ian tosses me off this platform. Any particular challenge that you think you've got in this? But as the Archbishop Philip said, don't be put off because the task looks like it's impossible. Don't be put off by that at all. As he said, some of the great things in the history of the world have been impossibilities that someone broke the realm of impossibility. And so the larger the task, the more you expand your mind. If it doesn't expand your mind, it's not a good project in the first place. And so it's got to be something that expands your mind. Now, who's got a question you've got about some particular fundraising that you're trying to do or you hope to do? Yes.
So people give readily to good causes. So if you want to give to cancer, it's easy to raise money for cancer research, or to raise money for refuge for men or women. But to give money to the church is something different. It doesn't have that kind of sense of need about it. And if you give to one church, then you've got to give to many. And why give to the Christian church, why not to Muslims? There's a whole range of factors which make it much harder. So there are ways of overcoming that kind of resistance. I mean, if you've got a choice between giving to cancer research or to a local church, you go for cancer because it's nice and easy.
True, that is very true, and particularly right now, churches are going through an enormously difficult time. Not only are the congregations ageing, I mean, let's look around this room today, we're not actually booming with youth in the room, you know, today, and I'm the last bloke to talk, I'm 88. Churches are in where there's been a lot of bad publicity. The child abuse thing in Australia has hit churches for six, and I think I see yesterday that one victim alone went back and had another go at the Roman Catholic Church in Melbourne, and it was paid $1 million, something over $1 million, the highest child abuse claim. And the Roman Catholic Church in Victoria's got 2,000 people in that category, and they're all going to line up at the church now, so at the courts now to get it. So churches are in an awful position. Now you and I can say, well, we've had nothing to do with child abuse. I've got no evidence that in my church that I've been going to for 60 years at Aspley that we ever had any child abuse. But nevertheless, you know, we're caught in the same, you know, in the same mould. And churches have taken a big hiding in because they opposed same-sex marriage, abortion reform, assisted dying. There's a lot of people out there saying, look, churches are just not of this world. So you've got to overcome that barrier. And I personally don't go out, when I go out doing anything from my church, I don't talk about my church at all. That's not deceiving anyone. I happen to be a passionate follower of Jesus of Nazareth, and I'm doing what I believe he would do in my community. So I talk about Jesus of Nazareth. I don't talk about the local church at all. I say, do you want to follow this guy or don't you? Because Jesus of Nazareth is a man worth following. And so I think we've got to distinguish in many ways between the faith and the church as an institution. Now that doesn't mean we downgrade the church. We've got to have some sort of instrumentality that keeps us all together in a fellowship. It might have made a lot of sins down the years. But I believe the product we're selling is Jesus of Nazareth, not churches who committed child abuse. Having said all that, I agree that there are many more glamorous things. For instance, raising money for your theological college is not actually the sexiest appeal in the world, is it? In, you know,
That's why I'm here.
But there are people out there, older people, who are concerned that the church that was the cornerstone of their faith is dying. They believe that the message is not being heard. They would like theological colleges to turn out another Billy Graham. I don't happen to be a big fan of Billy's, but they want the theological, they're willing to pay for a theological college to turn out a spellbinder who'll reform Australia. And now that's a dramatic way, but there are many people out there who believe that one of the fibres of the nation that's not there is the fact the church used to be the cornerstone of the nation once. It's not. But people yearn that it might be, but it won't be the cornerstone in terms of its political clout like Archbishop Mannix had and all that sort of thing. Become the cornerstone of the world because society decides that for all that's wrong with society, greed and violence and sex and alcoholism and drugs and whatever the one guy who shines like a beacon is Jesus of Nazareth. So you've got to sell, I never lecture bishops, but you've got to sell the man and the people you're training to sell the man. There must be people out there who want to do that. Yeah. I hope you can find them. Yes?
I realise that money seems to be the common denominator.
Sorry?
I realise that money seems to be the common denominator, but do you have an example of an in-kind type of support, you know, where perhaps praise...
Yeah. In-kind support is an important thing. Let me say that I have done a lot of fundraising about things in kind. I've got to say that in the final analysis you need some money in the bank. You can have a lot of in-kind things and you've got to have some money in the bank. I just finished reading a book by Tim Costello. You all know Tim Costello, the Baptist minister, brother of Peter Costello, who he was World Vision. I'm sure a few of you went on a 40-hour famine. He's just written a book called A Lot with a Little. That's the title, A Lot with a Little. You can get it in the shops. I just finished reading it last night. It's about his ministry. It's a spellbinder. I wanted to turn the next page. Now, when he finished his theological studies over in Switzerland, where he did a 4-year degree in theology, when he came back to Australia, the Baptist Union said to him, you can have any parish that's vacant in Australia you want to. You're our star theological student. And he chose St Kilda, which had 15 members, all of them over 60 years of age, a church that was falling down, and the manse, or whatever the Baptists call the manse that was rectory, whatever they call it, that was falling down. And he went there because he wanted to go to the coalface, and St Kilda was, I don't know how many of you will admit to being in St Kilda, but St Kilda's where all the naughty people are in Melbourne, like King's Cross in Sydney and the Valley here in Brisbane. And so he went into this place and he started a ministry where he went out to all the houses of ill fame and drug places and hotels and nightclubs, found people who were in need and took them one step of the way all the time. Now, he was helped by many people who helped him in kind. For instance, people, so he went without a salary for the first couple of years. He was a lawyer originally by profession before he became a theologian, so he used to pick up some law work to keep him going, but he didn't take a salary. There were people who greatly admired that. There were people who came and repaired the church for nothing, no cost at all, in admiration for him. There were people who came and fixed up the parsonage because they admired him greatly. Now, that was all in-kind giving. But as he said, in the end, you still need somehow some money to pay. You can't do it all by in-kind. There's always something to be paid. But there will be people, if you're building something at your church, you might say, well, we'll provide the plumbing services for nothing. But they'll only do that if you've got enough money to do the place, you know. So it's got to be a combination of both in doing it. And so you look at both, yeah. How much time have I got, Ian? You tell me when I got to sit.
A quick one. That, in my previous fundraising experience working with Lifelight, Everald, what sort of expectation do you find, and Daniel, maybe you can address this as well, for those people who are philanthropists or big givers, in terms of the way you treat them throughout, you know, giving them, I guess, a grateful experience? What's your, obviously a lot of it can be personal relationship, but how special do you have to make them feel if they're big donors?
Depends totally on the person. Some people want you to treat them specially, and some people don't want you to treat them specially. It depends on how egotistical the person is. But let's look at the big donors from the start. First of all, one lesson I learned was that because a town is full of wealthy people does not mean that you can raise a lot of money in this town. I've met a lot of wealthy people who are thoroughly miserable and will not do it unless the wealthy person learned to share his or her ice creams with their little sister and brother when they grew up. They're never going to give you any money at all. And so the fact that you've got wealthy people means you've got some prospects, but it doesn't mean you're going to get them, and you try to get them. But when you do get them in, there are people who will only give you $1 million provided you tell the world that they're the better guy than St. Francis of Assisi, and you constantly praise them, and if you don't constantly praise them, you're in big trouble. There are people, and
put their name to a building.
Yeah, well, that's true. You can put their name to a building or something or other, but there's a limit to the way in which you can pander to their ego. So you've got to come to a deal and say, right, what is it you want from us in terms of making you look like a good guy, and set the rules before you start, otherwise it gets out of, it gets out of hand. But then there are other people who'll give you money provided you don't tell anyone, and you've got to respect. There'll always be people walking around saying, St. Saviour's got $1 million from somebody. Who was it? There's a big scandal to find out who the hell you know, gave this money, and what devious sins had he committed that made him give this money, and anyway, and what have you. And so, you know, all donors are different sort of people, but St. Matthew, I think it is, I'm sure the bishop will, there's a passage there which says that you must give money and you must not skite about it at all, you know, you must hide it. I think it's Matthew 6, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But, you know, the Bible actually says if you make a gift and you want glory for that gift, you don't deserve it. I mean, so we can decide. But, having said all that, if some bloke wants to give you $1 million and he wants his picture in the Courier Mail, well, I'd go out of my way to try and get his picture in the Courier, provided that was it at that, you know, at that point. And I think you ought to handle them as they come.